author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC. Today's show is going to be a special, all-encompassing examination of Donald Trump's first 100 days in office and a look at the Democrat front bench for 2028. It's going to be a great show. Remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides, and we're joined by longtime host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Welcome back, Tim. Thanks for coming in.
Okay, let's have some fun, Mark.
So, I mean, it's been a crazy 3 months, Tim, and we're fast approaching, I believe it's April 30th, the 100-day mark of Trump's second term here. Now, usually a president only gets, I think there's one other exception. Was it Grover Cleveland who had consecutive terms?
Yes.
So a president usually only gets 100 days honeymoon period. Trump didn't even get that, I think. I think the ambitiousness of his agenda and the fact that he was already the left-leaning fourth estate public enemy number one, I don't think he had a honeymoon period, but we're 100 days approaching. Give me your overall take.
Well, in terms of the numbers, like 100 days, 1,000 days, whatever, which is what John F. Kennedy had before he was assassinated. I think Trump is looking at this like he's got a 2-year term, essentially, because all the metrics over the years show that the out party picks up seats in Congress in the midterm elections, which come up next November. And the Republican majority is so thin in the House that I would put it somewhere between possible and certain, probably in the likely category that the Democrats seize control of the House of Representatives next year. Probably not the Senate, because Republicans would need to lose 4 seats for that to happen. But Trump feels like he has no time to waste, and he wants to get everything done very quickly, and he wants to create the kind of imbalance, or shall we say chaos, that he thrives on. Because he's had so many initiatives, from tariffs to immigration to DOGE, and all the rest of it, that would ordinarily be an awful lot for a president in 4 years.
Yeah.
And he's done it in 3 months. So who knows what will happen in the next, 18 months between now and the midterm elections. But I think he's looking at it that he really only has until November of 2026, effectively January of 2027, to really affect the kind of change he wants, which is why he has the one big, beautiful bill that is still being, argued over, debated between Republicans in the Senate and the House. He knows he's not going to get any tax cuts if Democrats take control of the House in 2026. So he feels like he is on a rapid schedule. He's got no time to lose. And there's so many things also, Mark, that he wanted to do in the first term that he couldn't do for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was he was surrounded by these concocted scandals that the Democrats cooked up, which took up so much of his time and energy. But we've said it before, and I'll say it again, Trump is much better off having lost in 2020 and coming back with 4 years to ponder exactly what he wanted to do. And he's far more focused and far more rebellious, revolutionary, if you want to call it, here, with his second term being separated from his first.
I think you're absolutely right about this idea of he sees himself as having 2 years to get everything done. And because after that, he's obviously in the position of Barack Obama, who famously said, "I've got a pen and I've got a phone." But Trump is actually operating like that already. He's doing almost everything through the executive branch, the executive powers, and as of yet, as time of recording, we haven't had any, let's say, substantive legislation go through both chambers and to the president's desk. There's nothing substantive yet, and so everything he's
True.
doing is with the pen and the phone, and that's more likely not to get challenged while both houses are with the executive. And I think when it comes down to, yeah, he has to get everything in place now. And then well, here's the conundrum, isn't it? He's either got to get everything that he's doing now, it's got to start paying dividends before the midterms.
Yes.
So he can try and help the upper and lower chamber hang on to their majorities. And if it doesn't, well, he's still got the pen and phone, but he's unlikely to be able to be, as you say, revolutionary going through 2027, 2028.
Couple of points on that.
Yeah.
He is doing, as you said, almost everything through executive orders. Uh, and of course, the problem with executive orders is that they can be reversed
Yeah.
as soon as a president of the other party or even one of your own party comes in and can reverse those. However, he also realizes that, for example, closing the border, firing federal workers, and getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse have the effect of legislation in the sense that no president's going to come in and say, I want to
Yeah.
restore waste, fraud, and abuse. I want to open the border. And I want to rehire unnecessary federal employees and re-featherbed the federal government. So he realizes that it has the effect of permanent change. Now, to the point of trying to do everything early so it has time to play out, there's no better example of that than the tariff regime that he has set out, which keeps changing, day to day, depending on the circumstances, which is what he likes.
Sure.
He thrives on
Strategic
chaos.
ambiguity. Yeah.
He's strategic ambiguity and chaos that tells his enemies, I don't know what this guy's going to do next. And of course, the tariffs, have shaken markets, not just in the US, but across the world. But he knows that this is something that will take time to work. And by doing it 2 months into his 48-month term, he gives it many, many months before the midterms to have its positive impact on the economy. And who knows, if they have the impact that he thinks that it will, the Republicans might be in better shape for the midterms than they ordinarily would be.
Yeah. Well, they've got the Republicans really have a second bite of the apple on this as well, don't they? Because let's say, just for example, let's say that what Trump's doing with the tariffs is effective, but it's going to take time to materialize or to give the return on investment, as it were. So if it hasn't materialized by the midterms, the congressional Republicans take a shellacking. But if after that it starts coming through, sure, the Democrats will say, well, that's because we've had to deal with this and we've been trying to guide it to steadier waters, but nobody's going to buy that. And so he's actually got the full, as you say, the full 48 months for them to come to fruition. And if they do, then when we reach 2028, November 2028, the Republicans really get a second chance to take advantage of that and say, look what because it won't be Trump policy by then. It will be, look at what Republican policy has done.
Yes, because the party is owned by Trump now.
Sure.
Unlike in 2016, where there was a great deal of skepticism about Trump because he was a pure populist with a conservative bent. But the thing with the tariffs that's interesting, and Trump dropped hints, and this is his dream. Trump's dream is that we can go back to just before the turn of the 20th century, where there was no income tax, and all of our needs were met by tariff income.
Yeah.
During the McKinley administration, before he was assassinated, he would love to be able to eliminate the income tax for anybody making less than $150,000 and replace that tax revenue with tariff revenue. Now, if he can pull that off, I think Republicans can rule the roost for as far as the eye can see, because everybody hates income taxes.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the left will try to say, well, it's a trick and whatever, but if he puts the Democrats in the position of defending the income tax, that's not hardly going to accrue to their benefit. It will accrue to Trump's benefit, of course, and any successor of his, whether it be J.D. Vance, Glenn Youngkin, or Ted Cruz, or anybody else who will run for president as a Republican in 2028.
Let's see who's going to be running against that Republican after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and we continue our conversation with longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. So, Tim, we hinted briefly at examining who's going to be running against whatever 20 and 28 contender there is for the Republican Party. And you wrote a fascinating piece this week on a name that's making massive headlines for what I can tell, no discernible, sensible reason. And that is Mr. Stephen A. Smith. You may know him from presenting sports and very little else. Tim, leader of the free world, as you opened your piece, leader of the free world, Stephen A. Smith, the basketball guy. I'm rambling here because it's beyond my ken, as we say over this part of the world. What's happening with Stephen A. Smith?
Well, Stephen A. Smith has strong opinions about everything, and he's immodest to a fault. And he has claimed that he's had all manner of Democrats, fundraisers, elected officials, his own pastor, who were begging him to run for president. And you know what? It says a whole lot less about Stephen A. Smith than it does about the Democratic Party. Because are we supposed to believe that there's not a single elected official in the Democratic Party, from Gavin Newsom to Josh Shapiro to Gretchen Whitmer to Andy Beshear and others, who they believe can win the presidency in 2028? Apparently, a lot of Democratic operatives and mega donors believe that, at least if you listen to Stephen A. Smith. He went on The View, and as I say, with his textbook immodesty, he was asked by the left-wing ladies of The View. They set it up by saying, you're actually more popular than Pete Buttigieg, than Gretchen Whitmer, than Kamala Harris, and you're almost as popular as Pete Buttigieg. Would you really consider running for president? He said, I don't really want to run. I don't really want to be a politician. But if I did, I think I could beat all of them. So he is. Now, look, this is a guy who, he's not just, I wouldn't even call him a sports commentator. I'd call him a basketball commentator. He knows nothing about hockey. He knows very little about football or hockey or baseball. I repeat myself with the hockey, but he's a basketball expert. He played college basketball himself, and he's got a strong personality. He has some charm. He has some charisma. That's true. But if the Democrats have this dream that he can become their Donald Trump, and he can be a guy who can come in and basically wipe the slate clean, so that they don't continue to carry the baggage of the disastrous Biden-Harris administration, then you've got to think that's the best reason, that they need a blank canvas on which to paint a pretty picture with a guy like Stephen A. Smith. The problem is he has no depth, has no expertise on policy. He's never been in politics. He's never led an organization. He's never hired people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to envision him sitting in the Oval Office with the most important job in the world is, to say the least, a bridge too far.
Well, that's I think you really hit the nail on the head with a couple of those points there, Tim. And specifically, there's one that actually Matt Walsh on the Daily Wire made this point that he's never demonstrated any leadership. So we could say that he hasn't got a history in politics. Sure, Donald Trump also didn't have a history in elected politics, although he spent the last 30, 40 years talking about politics, trade, economics. Whereas Stephen A. Smith, he doesn't. He's kind of jumped into it a few months ago with an angry man shouting at the clouds routine, but he's never had any leadership of anything. And what is it? What has he led? There's nothing. He doesn't own a business, or he hasn't started a business. He doesn't employ people. He's never had to deal with people below him on a ladder, on a hierarchical organizational ladder. And Matt Walsh makes the point that if he were the guy who deals with Wendy's franchises, Stephen A. Smith would not get a job managing a Wendy's because he's 60 years old and he's never led anybody. And yet, because he got the vow of approval from the View, now he's apparently the leader. He's competent to be the leader of the free world. I don't see it.
And it's not just the View.
Sure.
He was brought onto ABC Sunday Show this week and interviewed by Jonathan Karl as if he was a legitimate contender for the 2028 Democratic presidential nomination. So, all the major media is covering the Stephen A. Smith story.
Sure.
As if there's a real possibility that, he could run, and as he said, he could beat all of them. Now, let's compare him to the most recent case of someone completely outside the realm of politics who entered the fray. That was Marianne Williamson, who's
exactly who I was going to say, yeah.
A spiritualist and an author. But if nothing else, Marianne Williamson was a serious person with quite learned. She'd written books. You may not agree with what she says, but she had a point of view that was legitimate for a lot of people. Stephen A. Smith has never even delved into politics beyond the level of a soundbite saying, I hate the Democrats and the Republicans. He said he felt like a fool for voting for Kamala Harris. Well, okay, what does that prove? He also said he
might be right.
He doesn't like Trump's DEI policy because he thinks it tags every person of color in the workplace as a minority hire rather than being qualified. Okay, but that's about it for depth when it comes to Stephen A. Smith. Now, maybe he's a quick study. Maybe he can assemble some sort of policy platform. But, for a guy that's basically just been a basketball commentator and sports host, co-host, whatever, that's not going to cut it.
Tim, we'll be carrying on looking at how narrow and how shallow the Democrat front bench might be after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I'm Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with longtime host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Now, Tim, we've just been talking specifically about Stephen A. Smith and his unlikely, and I call it an unlikely bid for the White House because the betting markets have him at 40-1 at present. And I'm sure that the more he opens his mouth and gets out there on the campaign trail, those odds will only lengthen. But yes. Who do we have? I say we. Who are we looking at in terms of the what kind of front bench the Democratic Party has? Because as you rightly pointed out, if Stephen A. Smith is the contender everybody's talking about, what does that say about the rest of the bench?
So what you're actually asking is, who are all the candidates that Stephen A. Smith is sure he could beat?
Yeah,
If he
exactly.
ran.
Those guys and gals.
He said that, and by the way, he said, I don't really want to run, but there's so many people that are asking me and pleading with me to do it that I have to consider it, which I've heard from many a politician over the years. So he's got that part of politics down anyway, that I'm being drafted. I have no choice but to run. But in terms of the legitimate Democrat office holders, I think Gavin Newsom is such damaged goods now. The outflow of people from California to other parts of the country tells a story, really, that the last few years have been the first ones where California has lost population rather than gained it, because it was always considered a paradise and a dream of many people to move there because of the weather and everything else. He's got a horrendous record on almost every front, except maybe DEI, minority hiring, and that sort of thing, and expanding the bureaucracy in California. But they run massive deficits. There is no fiscal restraint. And, he is the perfectly coiffed candidate that you would sort of, if you had to design the ideal candidate from scratch, if artificial intelligence was going to create the best looking candidate, it would be Gavin Newsom.
Don't get me started on conspiracies here about Skynet and sending back a cyborg to shape politics.
But if you were trying to create the perfect looking female candidate, that might be Gretchen Whitmer, who's very attractive and has, served 2 terms in Michigan. And it's obvious that she's got ambitions because she went to the White House, even though she demanded not to be photographed and held up a piece of paper in front of her face saying, don't photograph me. God forbid I be associated with Donald Trump. But the point is, she went to the White House probably to show that she can reach across the aisle, which is what people are looking for. But she did something in 2024 that I don't think she can ever recover from, when she did a mock communion with some sort of left-wing activist where she was mocking Catholics and really all Christians. And it was so, to me, I've seen politics for 60 years, but that one was really shocking. It's only one thing, but I think that would be used by the Republican the same way they used the comments by Kamala Harris about transgender surgeries for people in prison. And it would be devastating to her. You've got Josh Shapiro.
Tim, could I jump in on that? Something's just occurred to me here. But also holding up the binder in front of her face like a 2-year-old playing peekaboo. I think that picture will be the fulcrum point of that really derails what she's doing. And in the same way that for Donald Trump, him with his fist raised and blood pouring down the side of his face, that image, as far as I'm concerned, that's what won him the election. And there are certain moments, and I think for Gretchen Whitmer, that was the moment on which her political career will ultimately turn. And it might be a little too soon. She may do many more weird and bizarre things before it comes time to run, but I think that's it. Sorry, so you were saying about Josh Shapiro.
Well, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, has been successful and popular in the Keystone State. He's considered a more moderate Democrat who doesn't really kowtow to the far left the way the rest of the party seems to have done over these last years. But let's be honest, being Jewish, I think he's got a problem politically. And I'm just saying it outright because, especially in the Democratic Party, we know that they dance with anti-Semites.
Yes.
We know that it's likely, or somewhere between possible and likely, that Josh Shapiro was not selected instead of Tim Walz because of the fact that he's Jewish. And because Kamala Harris and the rest of them were afraid of their far left base, that they'd be upset. So in terms of his credentials, I think Josh Shapiro is in a good position, but I really don't know whether in the Democratic Party, I mean, I hate to say it, but I don't know that they would support a Jewish presidential nominee.
There's a very good, I think you're absolutely right that there's enough of a margin of people who would vote against Shapiro because he's Jewish and because he is supportive of Israel.
Yes.
It would, I mean, I think that's the key thing, actually, that he's supportive of Israel rather than, for example, Bernie Sanders is Jewish, right?
Yes.
I hope
Yes.
I've got that
No,
right.
yes.
I think he is. I think he is.
Yes, he is. But he's also an uber
Yeah.
progressive.
Yeah.
And Shapiro is not. He's insufficiently progressive to overcome his background, I think, with the far left. But, Shapiro is also, this is what I call a sister soldier moment. Somebody in the Democratic Party has got to step up like Bill Clinton did when he talked about the extremism of Sister Soldier in 1992. And it convinced a lot of people that he wasn't a crazy lefty. Somebody, and perhaps it can be Josh Shapiro, needs to step up and say, enough with this radicalism, enough with throwing firebombs in Tesla dealers, enough with anti-Semitic protests on campus. Somebody in the Democratic Party needs to do that. He could be the one to do that. And another guy who could do that is Andy Beshear.
Yeah.
And just the fact that Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, is wildly popular and has won 2 terms as governor as a Democrat in a bright red state. I mean, to me, he's the most attractive of the candidates, at least in theory. And I think there's good evidence that he does plan to run because he's starting to make TV appearances and comment on Donald Trump. He did an MSNBC interview over last weekend in which he was critical of Trump. And so he may be positioning himself as well. And I don't know that you could turn away from a guy who's so popular that he can be highly approved of as a Democrat in a heavily Republican state.
Yeah, I wonder, because as we're well aware, the primaries aren't or haven't been for the Democratic Party an entirely open affair, and there's always fingers on the scales. And while I completely agree with you that Andy Beshear and Josh Shapiro, they both have the ability to cross over in certain states, important states, that will make a difference in a presidential election, and they could pick up traditionally red voters or certainly independents who are more conservative minded. But will they get the support of the party? Because the party itself seems, as you say, wedded to this ultra progressive ideology that they can't seem to shake. And so I wonder if they will even get the possibility to make waves in the upcoming presidential primaries for 2028. Tim, we are going to be back with Tim Donner, finding out just how red or blue the country really is after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back for our final segment on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing to finalize our conversation with Tim Donner, longtime host of this here radio show. Tim, thanks for sticking around so long. So I have a question for you, Tim. Is America MAGA country?
That's a good stink bomb to throw into the room and then walk away and let.
All right. I'll give you some data on this. So I've been tracking the polling and the registration data for where party affiliation lies, and I found it pretty fascinating. So you've got Gallup polls that have U.S. political party identification and leaning, and they've been tracking it since 1992. Now, in 1992, the Republicans had the advantage in party identification leaning over the Democrats. Ever since then, it's been Democrats with the lead until 2022 to now. It's now 46% would identify or lean with the Republicans versus 45% for the Democrats. And then to bolster that, and there's some from the Neapolitan News Service just to kind of back that up. Now, breakdown between Republican, Democrat with leaners, Republicans 46, Democrats 41. And this is all a trend, Tim. It's been a trend for the last couple of years, and that more people identify with the Republicans, less and less people identify with Democrats. Now, of course, independents are still they're the big cheese, the head honchos in terms of numbers. But it certainly seems to me that America is leaning more red. And I wonder if that is solely, or at least mostly, because Donald Trump has brought people under the MAGA banner who ordinarily would not be a Bush supporter, for example, a Bush-type Republican Party supporter. How's that for a bit more background before I get your answer?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a whole lot more MAGA now than it was when Trump was first elected, when people were kind of rolling the dice and saying it's worth taking a risk on this guy, since Hillary Clinton thinks half the country or half of Trump supporters are deplorable and irredeemable, and she was so unlikable. So they kind of rolled the dice. I talked to many people who said, yeah, I voted for Trump, but I never thought he could actually win. It was like a protest vote. Not this time, because they know about his record. They know about his predilections. He has, seized control, full control of the Republican Party. He's been the dominant figure in this party for 10 years now. I think a lot of this about whether America is becoming a MAGA country will depend on who follows Trump into the White House. And what I mean is if the economy is strong, if these tariffs work, if people are really pleased with the closed border and the removal of criminal aliens and the reduction of waste, fraud, and abuse in government, and the reduction of the federal workforce, which everybody's always complained about, I think it becomes a matter of whether J.D. Vance or someone else can consolidate those gains as to whether America can become, instead of just right of center like it's been for a long time, a little bit more right of center. And an analogy would be the Reagan-Bush years. You had blue dog Democrats, famously, who came out, working class Democrats who liked Ronald Reagan. He won 2 elections overwhelmingly. But then in 1988, George H.W. Bush took the party back towards the establishment Republican direction. And lo and behold, 4 years later, Bill Clinton won back most of those blue dog Democrats and became president for 2 terms. So I think a lot of this is based on the personal appeal of Donald Trump and his policies. It's not an institutional position that he has. It's not institutional favorability so much as it is favorability about this one man, just like it was with Barack Obama. The party, the Democratic Party, fell apart around him while he remained standing because he was personally popular. Now, of course, Trump has as many enemies as he does allies. But I think it's instructive. This is very interesting, Mark. For as long as we can remember, the conventional wisdom has been that when there's a high turnout in an election, it favors the Democrats, right? As long as Democrats get high turnout, they're going to win. Well, more than one political analyst, expert, pollster, whatever, has concluded now that high turnout actually favors the Republicans. And that, any complaints among the Democrats that Kamala Harris lost because she couldn't get her voters out. Actually, the conclusion was if more people had voted, Trump would have won by an even greater margin. And I think that also points to the idea that the country is solidly right of center right now. And part of that is because of Trump, of course, but part of it is because of an absolute repulsion to the woke policies of the Biden administration, which he wasn't able to shield like Obama did during his term. And he took the Obama policies and put them on steroids. And it's just wildly unpopular. The Democrats should have known it, but they still ran on it and they got their clocks cleaned.
Yeah, I wonder if part of the reddening of America that we're seeing in the polls is because people who would vote for a populist, because remember back in 2016, there was a lot of crossover between Bernie bros and Trump supporters. There was a lot of crossover there. So it was the populist vote that really won it for him, I think. And what we see now is you've still got the populists, but because Trump has become the Republican Party, they are now saying, well, I'm a Republican, but if Trump's no longer in the party, and as you say, if it goes back to something more like George H.W., will they then go back to independence, or will they then go to more to the left? Wherever they can get their feed of populism. And as you say, I think it all depends very much on who the next GOP leader is. And if that's J.D. Vance, at the moment, he's if memory serves, he's the 11-4 favorite currently to win 2028. And that's what is that? It's like 26%, 26 to 27% probability that he's going to win. And nobody else is even really close. I think there's a last word on this, Tim. Will it be J.D. Vance come 2028?
Well, that would be the default choice right now, to be sure, who would be like a third term of Trump, just like Biden was a third term of Obama. But that depends. I really think that the tariff regime, the high risk, high reward strategy of Trump with these tariffs is going to determine the ultimate success of his administration. If what happens is what Trump expects or hopes or wants or some combination of those things, I think that J.D. Vance will be a strong favorite because of the popularity of Trump. But if, as some fear, we fall into a recession and the tariff regime does not work, then it opens a door for a Democrat to tack to the center, like I said, someone like a Shapiro or a Bashir, who can stand up to the left wing of their party. Because after all, in 1972, George McGovern suffered a disastrous defeat to Richard Nixon, but the party straightened itself out, tacked to the center, and Jimmy Carter won in 1976, though in large part because of the Watergate scandal. And also in 1988, Michael Dukakis had, he was defeated in a virtual landslide by George H.W. Bush, and the party straightened itself out and got Bill Clinton to run as a centrist, essentially, in 1992. So, the state of the Democratic Party now looks to be doom and gloom and hopeless, but things can change quickly in politics depending on the economy and depending on whether the Democrats can find someone who's willing to stand up to their far left and have a position other than just opposing everything that Donald Trump is doing.
Art of the deal or roll of the dice, and perhaps they're exactly the same thing. Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. I enjoyed it.
And that's all we have time for on today's special edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guest, Tim Donner, and of course you, the listeners at home, for taking the time to tune in and join us. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, nor legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.